what we've been able to do at Pixxel, as well as any questions that you may have.
Wonderful.
Begin.
So great. So, Kshitij, when one thinks of space and with all the visual imagery that we've had of the scientists and engineers at ISRO and NASA and all the movies and on TV, there is this image of space being obviously, the last frontier and all of that, but a place that is inhabited by people slightly older than you and with little more experience. But so how did you guys at the ages that you are at decide to pick something like space, dive deep into it, and achieve so much of traction? Tell us that secret.
So, Sanjay, maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was a situation where space was the domain of, countries and space agencies, because lots of money, lots of funding goes into the picture. Systems have to be reliable, and lots of national security interests also came in at that time. But over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen some sort of a revolution in the way the space ecosystem globally works. And you are seeing companies come with audacious ideas without a lot of background in being able to achieve that idea. Whether it's companies like SpaceX that are now at a point where it is the paramount space company, or you're looking at companies like Planet Labs that really revolutionize that student idea of building CubeSats and putting them up in space for commercial purposes. There's a lot of change that has happened in the last couple of decades, and that was a support function for us as well. But in general, personally, I've always been interested in space technology. Back when I was young, been going through all these encyclopedias with pretty pictures of everything space related. So it always had this place of fascination in head. And as I went through the rounds, engineering, getting through college, met Aves at BITS. He was a part of the student satellite team in Pilani. And, that's when I found out that there are actually students who are trying to build satellites and send them to space by themselves. So as a concept, this is something where there's a lot of literature available. There's a lot of knowledge base available, and we had lots of ISRO scientists come and help and support us in the early stages of the company as well. So it was never, it was always going to be a daunting task, but both Aves and I, we've spent time on much more challenging projects without any sort of background. We spent time on the Hyperloop India team, where we were building a Hyperloop pod prototype for the SpaceX competition. There was no literature, nothing about building a Hyperloop pod in a 1 mile long vacuum tube and getting it go faster than speed of sound. So I think just in that sense, it's always been an interesting challenge to work on. And we saw that, everyone else globally was doing it. Why not go and do it ourselves as well?
Right. So, it's one thing to be interested in space, right? And as an engineer and as somebody who's curious from a technology standpoint, it's always interesting to read up about it, to understand how things work and all of that. But it's another thing to actually go out and build something.
Yeah.
Right. How did that transition happen? You said some people from ISRO, etc., came and helped you guys. How did you assemble the team? How did you think of doing what Pixxel is doing? In other words, instead of just launching satellites or coming up with nano satellites, pico satellites, all of that, why did you choose spectral imaging? So 2 questions. How did you put all this together, and why spectral imaging?
So I think that transition for both of us as founders happened when we were moving from all these student projects, student problems, to actual fundamental problems that we both felt very strongly about. We were looking at using satellite imagery for something called as a Thought for Food challenge, where we wanted to use satellite image data to find solutions to food scarcity related issues. And while working on such problems, you're also looking at the IBM Watson AI X-Rise, lots of different problem statements where we wanted to make use of satellite imagery, because that is one resource that allows you to do things at scale. And in India, where more than half of our population is agri-dependent in some or the other way for its sustenance, we thought that this is something which could be a very fundamental change in the way things work. Now, while going through the rounds, we realized that satellite imagery today is not good enough to identify these problems, let alone solving them. And for us to be able to do that, we started looking at different types of satellite imagery. We started working with different types of data. asking people who work with satellite data themselves. And that's where we realized that hyperspectral imagery in particular has a very significant value add over other sources of imagery. For example, if you're looking at something with your camera lens, you see it in RGB, red, green, and blue. But if you're looking at something with a hyperspectral lens or a hyperspectral camera, you see it in hundreds of different wavelengths. And when you do that, you jump directly into the chemical properties of what you're looking at. I won't go too far into the technical details of it, but once we realized that there is something that is a gap over here, there's something that is a payload that we can work on building and send up in space, we started figuring out, okay, A, who needs it? B, how do we build it? So I think those are problem statements that we started working on in our third year of college. And as we kept working on these problem statements, we reached out cold to a lot of ex-ISRO scientists, to a lot of people who use satellite data. Of course, we're not the only ones to figure out that hyperspectral imagery is good enough. So we talked to companies, organizations who also believe in the same, and we went ahead with the idea because there was a market opportunity available. There was a technology which in some ways had been built for moon missions and some NASA missions. It just needed to be commercialized and brought to a scale where the form factor is also acceptable. So a lot of these things came together. I guess we were a little lucky that we were at the right time where hyperspectral was moving from that scientific domain to commercial domain. So I would say at this point of time, that is how I look at it when I look back as to how that change happened. And once you have a strong enough problem statement that you're working on, a strong enough idea, vision that you truly believe in, it's not a very difficult job to convince the right people that this is a vision that has a true impact on the way things go around. And like at the end of the day, there are startups that work on food delivery. There are startups that work on building EV technologies, all sort of technology. So we were able to find the right kind of people who believe in building technology for the future, and that is how a lot of the work has progressed as well. At the end of the day, we like to pitch it this way as well, that we are building a health monitor for the planet, because what the kind of imagery that we have allows us to look at, crop pests, diseases, pollution metrics. So that's a lot of, if you look at someone who's loved space, or in general who wants to build technology, this is the ideal place, because you're looking at not just a strong problem statement, but you're also looking at a high-tech technology solution, which is looking into the future.
Right. You talked about food delivery. So clearly food delivery folks could also potentially be using your solutions in the future, right? Because when you take a plan, a map of a densely populated urban area, determining what are the roadblocks, how to navigate it, right?
Yeah, high resolution satellite imagery.
Yes, exactly. So that could potentially be your customers as well, notwithstanding the food delivery. And
perhaps, yeah.
Given that India is one of the leaders in remote sensing, right? And there's a lot of expertise available, and we've been doing this for decades. How did you, and while there's a lot of, let's say, open sourced material out there relating to HSI, hyperspectral imaging and all that, how did you decide on what specifically to use to differentiate yourselves? Because let's say, drone technology, right? A lot of drones with computer vision attached to it are also doing a lot of this imaging, and, particularly in agriculture, disaster, climate change, and so on. How did you figure out that, look, this is the kind of innovation, or this is the kind of breakthrough we need to be able to deliver to stand out?
So I think it's about the economy of scale, because when you're looking at doing pilot projects or, one-off projects with drones and with aerial vehicles, the consistency in the data versus the amount of effort, the manpower that goes into taking a lot of that data is very, skewed at the time. And what we realized, we were working with satellite data ourselves, and we realized that, it's a true differentiator. You don't need to worry about, your drones being shaky or having issues. So the image processing pipeline was very, very streamlined. You can collect 120,000 square kilometers of data from a satellite in a single day and beam it down and get it ready for processing, which is way, way far from something that a drone can do. There's obviously an initial expense, which is much higher than putting up a drone in the sky. But the kind of, economy that you look at 4 5 years from now, 2 3 years from now, after deploying a satellite, is it's basically, apart from ground operations, you don't have to pay for anything, and you're generating data constantly every single day. So just that scale that was available to us. And when we are looking at customers as well of satellite data, these are customers with 4 5 6 year long contract timelines. So at that point of time as well, just doing it at a drone level, at a UAV level, is not exactly very sustainable for such customers. In a lot of scenarios, we don't even look at it as a competing data set. It's an additional data set. So you're looking at drone data being used in cases where satellite data is not fine enough. For example, if you're looking at a mine, if you're looking at a mineral exploration area, to make it more optimal for the company to do their activities without wasting or without dumping onto vegetation, you can provide a wider map using satellite data, and you can have drones go and task that area. Similarly, for oil and gas companies to identify leaks in their pipelines, a broad scope can be identified using satellite data, and then exactly what leak needs to be taken care of can be fixed and identified using drone-based imaging. So, and in a lot of cases, it's complementary data sets. And that is the value add that really attracted us to taking care of the satellite side of things, because no one was doing that. And also because we really like space and wanted to build things for space.
That's the real reason that you guys really like space. Yeah. Good, very good. Always, that's very important. So now you guys are fascinated with space. From your college days, you started working on it, you researched it, you figured out what you want to do, you put together a small team, you reached out to these folks and other folks, and then you said, this is something that is really up and coming, which is so the spectral imaging bit. So let's kind of focus on that. Now, all of this is great. You started building a solution, and now you've got to be able to think about what is the business here, right? All of this was on the technology side. How did you craft a business solution saying, look, we are going to launch a constellation of satellites out in space, and therefore, how do you determine how many satellites you will need to produce? How many will need to be launched? Who's going to launch them? How do you capture all the images, stitch them together, do the analytics, and then, what do you do with the analytics? Somebody's got to pay you money for it, right? So how did all of this happen?
So for us, we were always in touch with users of satellite data. We've always been in touch with them, and understanding, talking to a lot of these companies when we reached out to them.
Give us a sense of who these potential buyers are. You said you talked.
So these are companies who have already worked with drone-based hyperspectral data, for example. These are companies who have used multispectral data, or these are companies who work with Sentinel, Landsat data which is either openly available or being used by other organizations. A few of them we publicly announced in terms of the companies that are there. But early on, when we were reaching out, you reach out to some 60, 70 people, and 2 of them respond. And even in those 2 people, we asked them, if we were to provide the solution, what kind of resolution would they look at? What kind of revisit would they look at? So when you're looking at satellite data in particular, you look at 3 metrics to differentiate yourself, 3 types of resolutions, how I would put it. One is the temporal resolution, in terms of how frequently you're providing image of a certain area. If you're looking at government satellites, sometimes they have 20, 30-day temporal resolution for certain areas, and that's probably not the best. The second one is the spectral resolution, in terms of how much quality you are able to identify the data, which is why we went hyperspectral. And the third one is the spatial resolution. How fine can you separate between 2 points on ground? So we knew that there are a lot of high spatial resolution options. There are not many high spectral resolution options. There are no commercial high spectral options. And third one is in terms of temporal resolution. I think Planet is the only one that provides, daily imagery of every location. So we thought we will keep that as a benchmark, provide daily hyperspectral imagery at a good enough resolution to our customers. And that's how we started. And then it's just your usual exercise of reaching out to users of this data, and then understanding, what their preferred metrics are, and then calibrating yourselves. Obviously, you put a filter and take the most preferred requirement. But even when we are designing any satellite mission, and when we were designing our constellation, we started with a full list of our customer requirements. Then we translated those into mission requirements. Okay, this is the number of satellites needed for this amount of revisit. And this is how we will phase it into multiple parts of the constellation, because that's how expensive it is to launch them. So there's a lot of these metrics that translate from the customer side of things to our mission and engineering side of things. And it is an exercise that was very, very active in initial 2-3 years of Pixxel. We are 3 years old now. Initial 2 years or so of Pixxel.
You guys are becoming ancient.
We are 3.5. Yeah, we are a little bit ancient.
Oh my God.
But the initial couple of years, yes, this was a very active exercise. Now it is something which is a feedback loop that already exists. So we have a customer team that takes care of, bringing in a lot of these requirements. But yeah, in the beginning, it was just ad hoc. You reach out to whoever you see is using satellite imagery, or whoever you think is using satellite imagery, and just pitch hyperspectral imagery to them and see what their reaction is.
And tell me, so when you launch, like you said, you need to calibrate the number of satellites you would need to launch for a particular resolution and spatial and HSI and all that. And the revisit or refresh rate of that image again. Give us a sense of how many satellites do you typically send out in a typical constellation, if it's not a secret, because once in 24 hours you do a refresh, right?
So a satellite can take images either straight down, which is Candid, or it can take images at different angles to ensure that we have a larger coverage. For us to have a global coverage at whatever angle is possible, we need 6 satellites up there, at least 6 satellites up there.
6 satellites.
And these 6 satellites ensure that any place on Earth, we can provide you an image of that place in a day. The angle is something that will keep changing. Now, as we onboard more customers, as we move ahead in the process, our capacity requirements will increase, and we are ready to deploy batches of 6 satellites each going ahead. For us to give a customer daily Nadi revisit, which is daily revisit looking straight down, we require a total of 36 satellites. So at the end of the day, it's just increasing these batches based on requirements, but bare minimum commercially viable constellation for us is 6 satellites.
Got it. So tell me, so do you actually build the satellite and then participate? And then ensure that they get launched? Or do you just build the imaging system and then, kind of rent or send it as a payload on some other satellite?
So right before this meeting, there was a meeting to understand a delay in shipment of semiconductors, which is
a big problem today.
It's completely messed up. And we take care of everything from building our electronic boards on the satellites to building the structure of the satellite. So we are on that process. The moment we translate those customer requirements to mission requirements, our mission requirements are translated into subsystem requirements. So we have all subsystems on board that take care of designing the spacecraft along with the payload as well. And we do all of that internally in India, in Bangalore. Once a lot of this process is done, we go through multiple iterations, multiple reviews of the design. We've recently closed CDR on our flagship Firefly satellites. And in the next few months, we will be integrating these satellites in Bangalore as well. So a lot of that work is underway. And we like to be proud of the fact that we are one of the only companies that works in imaging, that works as far deep as providing tools for analytics of images, that also has that upstream hold. We have a very strong supply chain. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to have full control on how the imaging happens, full control on how the payload works, because that in itself is strong IP in terms of how you operate a satellite in space. And that's something that we have very good control of. So we always wanted to be the team that is, able to build these payloads from scratch, build these satellites from scratch, and then deploy them in space.
Excellent. Now, you said a very interesting thing, that the design, development, manufacture of subsystems is done here in Bangalore, right? Now, because a lot of the general view appears to be that, look, India is not great at all these hardware subsystems or design of subsystems, which include a lot of hardware components, making the boards, doing the testing and getting them certified, all of those things. Just talk to us for a couple of minutes on what's been your experience in working with that ecosystem for creating the systems necessary for your software to work.
Okay, I don't know where to start because there are so many things, but I'll start with more recent things and then go back to how things were early on when we started. I think there are.
I hope, yeah, and it should be good news for the audience. Huh?
Yeah, yeah. So
You better be optimistic.
no. Good news first. I
Yeah.
think with the creation of InSpace and with the government showing initiative to actually have policies in place, to actually have mechanisms in place for startups in the space industry to interface with the government for approvals, for testing facilities. That is the most positive update here. It's happening. It's happening very quickly, and we've been beneficiaries of it with the Indian government. The second thing there is just in terms of frequency approval licensing, where the government is seeing us not just as a supplier of something to ISRO, but also as an operator that wants to operate its services in the private segment, provide this data, is something which is a change, and it's a very positive change that's happening. Um, Apart from that, in general, I think the MSMEs are used to providing to ISRO. So they have the capabilities. There is never a doubt about engineering capabilities here in India. For some niche systems, yes, it's not here. For example, we don't have foundries that can, process a lot of the semiconductors that I was just talking about, or we don't have specific capabilities to produce certain propulsion systems, certain systems. But that's happening. It's underway, and the space ecosystem in India is growing. And we feel like players like ourselves who interact with the downstream can bring in that money for upstream players to survive and thrive in this ecosystem as well. So that change is happening where MSMEs are also getting used to dealing with companies like us. We are working with a few in Bangalore itself for whether it's our structural manufacturing in Pina or it is our electronic manufacturing that happens in Yelahanka. We are working with companies that are not exactly used to working with startups to get them up to speed on what our expectations are. Because with government projects, because a lot of tax money goes into a lot of the ISRO missions, they're used to these 4, 5, 6 years of timelines, and now their requirement is okay, in 8 months you have to deliver everything that you're used to delivering in 5 years. Is a little bit of a change for them, but they are also very excited to work with us. So those are the positives. We still need an upstream ecosystem in India, and a lot of the roadblocks to that is the kind of import duties that we sometimes have to pay for even raw materials. For example, solar cells, solar panels, you have like 20%, 40% duties, and that in itself just bumps up your cost because these are very expensive components when it comes to space. So I think just a creation of a import-export, space-specific import-export policy is critical, because at the end of the day, you cannot be a sole isolated country when developing for space. I think if we have to leapfrog other countries in building space technologies, we have to realize that we have to be the end user for a lot of these externally built technologies. And we have been, but slowly, steadily getting to a point where we are also building upstream capabilities in the country. For example, building solar cells in India itself. It won't happen overnight, but as we see more users of solar panels, solar cells, there will be companies that will come and build those. Similarly, also other technologies, from as simple as a reaction wheel, which in the end is a very, very finely tuned built motor, to something as complicated as a full scale propulsion system for satellites. So there are startups like Bellatrix Aerospace. There are startups that and companies, older companies like BHEL, also working on building space grade batteries. So things are moving. Things are moving ahead, but slightly slower than what would be required for leading country in the space industry and the space ecosystem globally.
Right. Thanks. So now you've built everything. You've got access to suppliers who give you the quality products on time, with all the certifications, all the other clearances necessary. Now you built all of this. Then comes the big question: is okay, now we need to launch these. So how do you go about launching your satellites? Like you said, your minimum recommended size is six satellites at a bunch. How do you go about it? And I understand Falcon X was one of your carriers, with the, better known as Elon Musk's company. How did you go about that process?
So the good thing that has happened in the last 10 years or so, I would say, is the launch cost has significantly come down. Previously, you were looking at launch costs of millions of dollars for a small CubeSat type satellite, and that in itself meant that a lot of companies, a lot of students who wanted to build satellites, small startups who wanted to build satellites, were just got out of the way. And it was the domain of these primes, which are usually companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Airbus. But now, with the way SpaceX has been launching its launch vehicles, with the way launches have just increased and they've become boring. People say that, you have a launch every week, every 2 weeks. It's come to a point where it's nothing new. Back, I remember when I was a kid, used to, stay up late or wake up really early in the morning to watch Doordarshan and watch these launches. So I think that change has happened. Every week, every other week or so, if you log into YouTube, you'll see a SpaceX launch happening, and there'll also be a booster that comes back in land state. So because of that democratization of how launches are happening and how much that access is available, the cost of launch has come down. And for us, that process is just reaching out either to the launch provider directly or to aggregators, launch aggregators, companies that take care of getting smaller companies together for a single launch. And you have to go through a launch services agreement. It is pretty common across the space ecosystem, whether it's a private space company or a space agency like ISRO. Once you go through the...
How complex is that agreement?
Just like
you need like 200 lawyers to go through it, or is it simpler than that?
We've had one, so I'm not sure.
It's relatively easy.
Okay. But yeah, it's some usually 10-15 pages of agreement that says that your satellite should not blow up our launch vehicle, and if our launch vehicle blows up, we'll have to figure out how liability and things are. But at the end of the day, it's a fairly standardized process, and we've done that more than 2 times now, finished launch services agreement. And I think at this point of time, once the LSA is taken care of, it's working with the launch provider to get approvals, licenses that are required to put the satellite up in space, and then working with them to take the satellite to the launch site, making sure everything is checked. There are remove before flight RBF pins that you need to remove to make sure that you're not flying something with a switch turned off space. And after that, it's just operations of the satellite. So it used to be a very, very complicated activity. It still is a complicated activity, but there's a very defined process. It's actually very fun.
Oh, good. And a lot of folks might be interested in learning how you reached out to, the Falcon folks. Was it any different than reaching out to anybody else?
No, just send them an email.
Yes, send them an email. That's it. As simple as that. Okay, so I think the audience is now good. Very good. As simple as sending an email. Wonderful. So you got these satellites out there. You're getting these images, and clearly, and then once the data comes back in, you're doing the analysis. You're supplying that data to your customers, so from a revenue model standpoint, how do you see that evolving, in the sense that is there a subscription that people pay for all the access to the data, and then a fee for, let's say, regular access? Is that some kind of a model of that type?
Absolutely. So there are 2 main avenues for us to generate money as a company. One is a simple tried and tested model that has been on for tens of years in the remote sensing industry, which is we have satellites up in space, customer wants data products, and we provide those data products. There are large agreements that are usually 5 to 7 years of time. And for these agreements, there is a pre-agreed price on the data. And there is a commitment that this is how much imagery we will serve. Let's say you have, you want an image of your backyard, and you want it every day for the next 5 years. We will sign an agreement and make sure that we provide an image of your backyard to you every day for the next 5 years. There will be certain metrics here or there, but at the end of the day, it's just a simple, as simple as providing a service or providing a solution. This is the first layer of what we provide, SG products that anyone can use and analyze. What we also do is we have a platform that allows people to not only use our image data, but also other sources of data, build their machine learning models, build whatever they want to, and then deploy them and get information out of it.
For example, it's like a mashup. You allow people to do a mashup of the data that...
Yeah. So let's say you're
Meaning I can overlay my data on what you have, right?
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
can do whatever you want to as long as you have the capability on the analytics side of things. So there are companies who have their own internal analytics teams. There are companies who have, the capability to actually go ahead and analyze this data internally. And for them, we provide this platform where they can come use Pixxel data, use other sources of data. Some we have on our platform, some they can bring in from there. And maybe sometimes they require ground data. To give you a simple example, let's say you're a hedge fund that wants to predict the price of corn in the United States, or you're a company, BFSI company, trying to figure out, insurance or something like that over fields. So obviously, satellite data, hyperspectral data is one source, but it's not the only source that you will use. You will use other sources of data as well, some ground data, some other GPS data or something like that. And at the end of the day, what you want is a histogram that tells you, okay, fine, this is a yes or a no for me. So in a lot of these cases, we do provide that platform-based solution, and that's our other revenue model, which is it's a SaaS company at the end of the day.
Got it. Understand. That's very, very interesting. Now, with the government, like you talked about, the government has been helpful and positive with regard to making, let's say, amendments to the older rules and regulations. And ISRO is working with startups. They've set up this other organization that essentially seeks to do commercial technologies coming out of ISRO. And then you've got these organizations like InSpace and others, which is a kind of an industry consortium working with funders and others. What more would you like to see as one of the leading players in India's nascent space tech startup ecosystem? What are the other things you would like to see that you think will be important?
I think more participation of startups in ISRO projects to the level where we are competing for such projects, and we are also competing internationally for such projects. More avenues for working with other space agencies as well, other companies to do partnerships to work on projects where, ESA and ISRO may have a co-project, or ISRO and NASA have the NISA project, and ISRO also has a lot of long-term plans, deep space plans that they have. They want to build their own space station as well. So there are a lot of these places where work has already been done globally. And to be able to get to a point where we are supporting ISRO in getting to their goals, it would be nice to see such projects come to startups as well. That is one. I think other thing there is also, there are processes in space has been set up, but at this point of time, the interaction is in person with startups. And as soon as the volume of companies will increase, this is something which is not very scalable. So setting processes in place would be very critical to do a lot of these things. And the way things are right now, it's very, we have startups interacting with InSpace interacting with multiple government agencies. So just making that whole process very, very clean for us to, let's say, get a frequency license to operate. So we don't have to, meet multiple partners and get all of their agreement. It should be ideally a very simple process. So I think that is the goal of InSpace, and they are also working in that direction. What I would like to see is more engineers, more people in general interested in space technology, working in space companies, building their own space companies, setting up
what needs to change, and what needs to change to get more engineers to start doing stuff like you're doing? And second related question, an organization like TIE, right, which is focused on fostering entrepreneurship. Now the two are kind of correlated, with more engineers doing stuff in space, many of them wanting to do their own business, own startup. What can be done?
So I think that I will tie that back to your first question, which is, in industry, which is usually older people, stalwarts, how are you as kids, as university graduates, able to go ahead and do something like this? I think the question should be, why can't younger people also go ahead and do this? For entrepreneurs in general, for students in general, it ties up to a more fundamental problem with our education system, where we think that going to the US for a master's, or going to Europe for a master's, something like that, and then finding a plush job there is a good way of life. So I think just that feeling of doing something here in India, building technology in India, and taking care of things in a way where we are also building the country's long-term technological progress is a change that needs to happen. And we feel that, with companies like ourselves, like Bellatrix, like a lot of other companies like Agnicol, Skyroot, we are seeing that change. So it is, I can't just say that, something changed at a snap of a finger and you have a very good, nice space ecosystem, but more support in government processes, whether it's local or national level. Space companies usually require a lot of space. That's to build all the hardware that we want. So getting simple registrations, import, export, because it's always going to be a global space economy. It's never an isolated space economy, unless you're China, which is a very different process. But I think the main change that needs to happen is a mindset change, that this is something that is just as complicated as an EV company, or just as complicated as working on any other technology problem. The systems sometimes have to be more reliable, more expensive, but at the end of the day, it is a solvable engineering problem. There is enough literature for it. So it's more of a mindset change, I would say. And in the VC ecosystem in particular, I think that acceptance to take hardware bets will come after seeing successes in the ecosystem. So we do want to have ourselves and other startups that I mentioned be examples where even for the VC ecosystem, they are more confident in taking such bets, because we've usually seen that the Indian venture capital ecosystem follows what has happened in Silicon Valley. And that's, again, not a good model. We need to be able to leapfrog the countries in terms of building this technology.
Excellent. Excellent. And, it's so heartening to hear what you said. And the good news is that you have a large number of Indian funds backing you, funds with a large proportion of capital that's been raised in India by Indian investors and backing you. Excellent. Very nice. So, in many ways, therefore, you guys are a pioneer, having raised over $30 million and going ahead. So let me just ask a couple of questions that the audience members have posed, and then I'll get back to our conversation, assuming we have the time. A question for you, Kshitij, has come in from Shashank of Avistrat. You probably obviously know them. He says, look, you've been talking about different kinds of resolutions, spectral, spatial, temporal, and all of that. What would be the next step or cutting edge, in your view, in in either temporal or spectral or spatial? Where do you think the next big jump will come?
I think the next big jump is happening, which is in the spectral resolution. And as we are getting into spectral resolution, we are also moving way far into infrared. So problems that usually come with clouds in terms of being able to image at certain times of the day, problems that are there around identifying moisture levels, around identifying minerals, a lot of them are being solved as we are moving. As how to put this, as we are getting deeper and deeper into the spectral resolution part of the problem. And there is daily data available, there is high resolution data available, but matching that with a data set that is actually jumping into the chemistry of what you're looking at is the next big jump. And it is happening. That's what we're working on.
So the more of basic science then, right? Basic science of chemistry, physics, and all that.
Yeah, so see, with hyperspectral data and with high resolution hyperspectral data, you are actually able to get into the chemical properties of the plants. So, for example, you can identify the chlorophyll content in leaves. You can identify NPK deficiencies in the soil. These are a lot of things that are currently unavailable from space, and having this input from space for a vast period of, for a vast swath of land is going to be a big change in the way I see it. And in the long run, we do have plans to get to multiple next big jumps, but time will tell how that goes.
We'll discuss that in due course.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Umanath Nayak, his question to you is, while all the satellites and imagery and all that is going on, clearly there are concerns relating to security that governments might have for security reasons, and particularly as they're doing cross-border kinds of imaging. How do you handle such issues?
So at this point, the way I mentioned it, we do need licensing for putting up any asset in space. So if the government essentially licenses you out to go ahead and put up your satellite in space, to operate at a certain frequency, to take images at a certain resolution, satellites have been in the defense domain. Like that's how satellite imaging started, through reconnaissance in the 70s. So there definitely are defense applications to satellite imagery, but then at the end of the day, you have to work with the regulators to ensure that you're not violating any terms. So we don't work with countries in this comet list, or you don't end up working with resellers that are flagged by the government.
So is there some kind of geofencing that occurs? Well, not geofencing, whatever the term is in space. Does that occur?
Once the satellite is up there, it is in an orbit that can take images of any latitude, any place on Earth.
Right.
At a 5-meter resolution. So there is no geofencing as such, because we do take up images of every place on Earth. However, there are cases where government wants exclusive access to certain locations, and we do provide that. So license agreements with the government.
That's a legal agreement.
Yeah. So the government pays for it.
No. What I meant was, there is no technological solution that prevents you from being able to access certain latitudes and all that.
Yeah, there is.
That's what I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah,
it's just a legal agreement.
Yeah, the true value, but the government can monitor, so they can come and monitor. And at the end of the day, the true value of the data lies in the analytics that you do with it. Sure. But that a lot of ground truth data is required, and that's where we also work with the government and be able to, in the ability to provide that data to them.
Yeah, and this is actually a matter of a lot of government's own security preferences, right? Particularly to have an Indian company doing all of this versus being reliant on, let's say, America's GPS or anything else, because we know that in tough times it can be a problem.
Correct. So even the Indian government at the moment uses data from companies like Planet, from the Worldview satellites as well, that Maxar operates. So having an Indian solution here is more preferred by them as well.
Agreed. So question from Prem Mirtinti, and it's a very straightforward question. What books do you read? And when you get started trying to build satellites, for students and others, is CubeSat a good way to start?
Okay, so books, really haven't had the time to get reading in this last 3-4 months, but usually I prefer to read science fiction. I really like reading history, historical fiction. So just anything that's history or fiction is fun. The last favorite book that I read was Guns of August. And that I was reading during the whole Russia-Ukraine scene, so it was kind of funny. But CubeSats, I believe, is a good way to start. It gives you a good background on what satellite subsystems are. So if you want to take a look at the technical understanding of how a satellite is, yes, I would very highly recommend student university program where you are building payloads, building CubeSats to put satellites up in space. ISRO also has the PS4 platform that they are making available to students and startups to put their payloads on. So if you have any particular payload that you want to build, any particular scientific payload that you have an idea about, you can actually contact ISRO and work with the PS4 platform as well.
Fantastic. That's wonderful to hear that ISRO is opening up for students and this PS4 platform that you're talking about. Question from Chakri asks, any plans for satellite broadband services and 5G satellite? I mean, that's a different domain, totally.
Yeah, we are an Earth observation company. Communication satellites are an entirely different ballgame. So our focus is on remote sensing observation of the Earth. Providing communication services, it's a bit too clogged up at the moment with one and all those companies.
Yeah. One question again for you from me is, all this collection of data on a, let's say, 24-hour cycle basis over long periods of time, over pretty much any part of the Earth and so on. At the end of the day, who owns this data?
We own the data.
You own the data.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then you make that available to others.
Yes.
So there is no open sourcing here. So it's not like you've got something out on GitHub and I go there and I access.
So there are multiple ways to access the data. There are different types of licenses. So we license out the data to our customers. We also make the data available for universities, for researchers to actually be able to develop models, to develop scientific inferences, because that's useful to us at the end of the day. So there are multiple ways that we make data available to our users, I would say.
Got it. Okay. Question from Jeshri. She asks, compared to earlier hyperspectral satellites like EO1 or Proba, which were out about 20 years ago, the advancement in tech, right? Just talk to us a bit about how has the advancement enabled better imagery. And second question is, any restriction on what geo you can gather data from or to sell to? For example, if you can't go over Pakistan and sell it to, let's say, some other country, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So one is in terms of the changes that have happened over the last 10, 20 years, the biggest change is in the sensor technology itself. The sensor technology has significantly improved, and that has allowed us to build much more compact payloads. So early in the day, you used to look at 300, 400 kg satellites. Now that is 30, 40 kilogram satellites. And that, reduction in the size, weight has meant that we have had a reduction in cost, because not just satellite components, but also the cost of launch is much, much less. So I think that is the biggest change, I would say, at this point of time. And the sensors have improved to a point where the frame rates are better, where the quantum efficiency numbers are better. So you're seeing better quality data as well. As far as the restriction goes, there is no restriction in imaging. There is restriction in selling, obviously, but no restriction in imaging. For selling, we have end user license agreements with every person that we license out our data to.
So that's like any other regular SaaS or software licensing arrangements, end user use conditions and so on.
Correct.
Like just for my own curiosity, how much does a typical launch cost?
A lot, but I think
are we
the
talking
standard
6
pricing.
figures? Are we talking 7 figures? What are we talking about?
So I think the
less?
standard pricing, I think, is somewhere around $6,000 to $7,000 per kilogram from SpaceX, which
per
is
kilogram from space. Okay, got it.
yeah, the SpaceX price, which I believe is the lowest in the industry at this point of time. The nominal prices would be 3 to 4 times of this. So that's where the industry standard is at the moment.
Okay, so those of you thinking about launching satellites, please start planning the budgeting already. Now, the question from Muralidhar Surya wants to know what is the unsolved problem that he can take a crack at and build the next SpaceX.
There are a lot of unsolved problems in the industry, but I think India has a unique advantage in providing upstream solutions in the space industry that we are yet to exploit. Whether it's building of satellite hardware, satellite technologies, or even in providing other sorts of services like solar cells, like batteries, which are not only space specific but are in multiple other domains as well. So I think that is one place. If I had to see a change, I would prefer if the Indian semiconductor industry also developed to at least a bare minimum extent. But there definitely are opportunities, problem statements out there. It's just a matter of understanding what's available globally, what's missing, and you probably would have to read a bit on how the space industry globally is moving. There's a few niche problems as well. If I had to point a few out, I would say just in the way spacecraft subsystems are built out, we have to import some of these from outside. We ideally would not want to. We would want to work with Indian suppliers, vendors. So people who can build radios in India, people who can build reaction wheels, torquers, anything in India. There are companies that we deal with in Canada, in Europe, in South Africa. We don't want to deal with them. We want to work in India. So, a lot of this can also be taken up. So in my level of opinion, I'd say upstream is a place where we have a lot of scope, and you will have customers. You will have customers like ourselves first. You'll also have customers like ISRO, other startups, and you can also export this to companies all over the world. So it's not that the customer base will be very limited.
Got it. So that's again very positive and heartening to note. With regard to, and let me get back to this point, and because this is something that keeps bugging me, there's a lot of precision engineering work required in making these systems, right? Particularly as it gets into space. And and since you're in the hyperspectral imaging area, there's a lot of let's say super high-end imaging technology, lenses, etc., that you might be using. Do we have the capacity, capability, and supplier network to do these, or do we need to import the core parts? For example, computer vision type technology that comes up.
See, the good thing is the medical manufacturing industry, the biomedical manufacturing industry in India is so mature that we do have the capability. to do a lot of the precision work in the country, especially for mechanical manufacturing. We can easily do it in the country, and there are companies that are working on aircraft manufacturing, working on similar problems around other complicated engineering domains that can do it. I don't think the capability is an issue. It's just a matter of enough companies taking up these problems and solving them. Some areas, yes, we don't have anyone to provide in these areas, but it's not that it's a roadblock. It's a simply solvable problem.
And it's an opportunity, right? If nobody's there,
Definitely.
somebody can build it.
Yeah.
Got it. Great. So so that gets us. But there's a question from BN Suresh. How can satellites solve Bangalore city's problems, traffic problems? So everyone's looking to you as the savior.
No, I think at this point only BBMP can solve the problem. 100
I think that's the biggest money spinner for you. Just forget everything else, agriculture, mining, and just focus on solving Bangalore's traffic.
I generally don't have any solution there. It's probably just working with BBMP to figure out better avenues of how they choose their construction practices. But no, understanding clogging is probably a solution that analytics companies can work on, and Google does this pretty well with everyone using the Google Maps solution. But working with high resolution satellite data providers to understand, okay, this is the time of the day when you see the most amount of clogging, and also giving that input to people who are working on the Bangalore metro projects, that these are high congestion areas, these require better public transport infrastructures. This is a place where road construction, it just blocks the entire traffic for days and days on end. So just understanding a lot of these trends is where satellite imagery can be really helpful. But as a solution, that is up to BBMP and God, I would say, at this point.
Outside the scope of your syllabus. Okay, good. Question from Rajesh Gopal. What's your view on space debris, right? With more and more satellites being launched, lower costs, etc., etc.
It is a very real problem. At this point of time, we see conjunction analyses happen to see, if two satellites are going to hit each other or be in a certain distance of each other. And when two bodies in space they hit at a really, really fast speed, and that causes a gigantic collision that can cause particles that can hit other objects. And it's a curve that no one wants to see. But there are regulation level practices that can allow companies to operate safely in space, which is, once your operations are done, bring the satellite down safely. It's a very simple solution that you keep some fuel on the satellite if it has propulsion to bring the satellite down. Satellites in low Earth orbit, especially 500, 550 kilometers in space, can come down in 7 to 8, 10 years. And they naturally come down. The orbit naturally decreases because there's some thin atmosphere that keeps dragging the satellite down slowly.
And then they burn by the time they reach Earth, right?
Yeah, it's like a pretty meteor.
Disintegrate,
Yeah. That's not the debris which is the problem. The debris that's the problem is a lens cap that detaches from a satellite and is about to hit the International Space Station and endanger the life of astronauts. So there definitely needs to be better regulation practices in how startups, companies are allowed to put satellites in different orbits. There need to be better practices around how satellites are brought down. It's a matter that all countries, startups, companies, not just startups, but also existing companies need to collaborate on, because we cannot end up polluting the space and make some really, really important orbits unusable. And when something like an ASAT test happens, China's done a bunch of these, Russia does these. So when something like that happens, it's truly heartbreaking because it causes a lot of that debris, and some of it will stay in orbits for tens and tens of years. So something that is a real problem. It is something that will need a solution which involves people working together. There are some companies with slightly more innovative solutions. There is a European company, there is an American company working on collecting satellite debris, collecting waste in space. So there are a lot of these things also happening, but at this point of time, I have some notification. Reached 5:30.
Okay.
But no. So I think it's something that definitely needs a solution. There are companies that are also working on identifying debris, like Digantara in India. There's a few in the US as well.
So there's a opportunity, like you said, for let's say there are e-waste companies. Maybe a few years you'll have S-waste companies, space waste companies
Would
going out
love
there
to,
cleaning up the debris, right?
would love to see some, yes.
Yeah. And last two questions before we wrap up. I know you're a busy guy and we are holding you up as a startup and all that. You talked about materials like semiconductors, etc., kind of being one of the bottlenecks today, given the overall global situation. Let's say, what about things like the surface coating that is required for sensors and others? Those kinds of chemical paints and requirements. What's the experience with those?
Very, very niche expertise required in a lot of these cases. For example, thermal materials we have to import again. And if you're a small satellite company building a small, tiny satellite, you will still be required to import a bulk quantity because that's the MOQ on some of these components. If you're looking
somebody,
at,
let's say like NCL in Pune,
yeah,
National Chemical Labs, do they have some stuff that you guys can use?
Yes, they do work on a lot of these chemical coatings. We also work with optics manufacturers who have access to these coatings. So we do work with a company in Mumbai called Paris they recently went public, I think. So they do a lot of optics manufacturing for ISRO, and they've done our optics manufacturing coatings, and these are very specific space grade coatings. So we do have that capability to have such coatings, such practices. Again, fine engineering being taken up in India itself. And I think a lot of it is the result of strong biochemical, biomedical industry existing in the country.
Got it. And last two questions, I'll ask both and then we'll wrap up.
Absolutely.
One of the questions comes again from Prem Mirtinti. He says, what sensors, especially on the photonics side, that are used in satellites, do you think can be built in India on priority? And what is just one other question again from Jayashree. She's asking about, you're working with hyperspectral data, you're doing analysis and all of that. Does your model include you doing the analytics and supplying stuff, or do you just sell the base data?
So I'll go to the second question first. We do sell the base data, we do sell data products, and we have the tools to work with analytics. So we aren't a services company, so we won't go into individual single problems unless there is something which is a big appeal to us.
Got it.
But we provide the tools for people to do that. So we have a platform, we have the processing tools for people to go ahead and easily do that. It's usually a very niche skill set to work with such data. So providing the tools to make it easier.
The customers can essentially run their own models.
Absolutely.
On the data that you have, right?
Yeah. And to go back to the first question about photonics, I would jump with happiness if there were companies building sensor solutions in India. There were companies building, other solutions that are required for making these cameras. Without revealing too much, I'd say that there are a lot of optical processes, techniques that do not exist in India at the moment. And not only us, but also ISRO has had to import these from outside. So it would be good to see this being developed in India. It is happening with some companies, but slower, significantly slower than what we would want. So yeah, photonics is yes, big.
It's a huge space. Can you use your technology to determine groundwater depletion?
No.
Good. Thanks. Short answer. And for a 16-year-old, what would your advice be? Who wants to work in this field?
You're 16, just enjoy a bit.
Enjoy life. Don't
go play football.
Be spaced out, huh?
Yeah, and don't miss your physics classes. I think that's pretty much it.
Wonderful. Hey, Kshitij, that gets us, I think we have like 4 minutes past your deadline. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks for being a sport and for happily answering all the questions. I wish you, your team, and everybody in this space of space tech, particularly startups like Pixxel, the very, very best. Thank you very much. Thanks you, audience, for joining us.
Thanks everyone. Thank you, Sanjay. Take care.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.